I don't like internet bullies, but am I allowed to be mad if they're right? Well, it's time to find out. 2 months ago, I built a tiny jar vivarium for 2 very neat little geckos, and the reception was mostly positive.
Absolutely love it.
This is absolutely incredible. I want to try this.
But it was impossible to ignore some of the criticisms.
I'm of the personal opinion that it should be twice the size of what it's it.
I sent this to your landlord.
He's hot but in a weird way, and I don't know how it makes me feel.
It can be super tough to design an enclosure for such tiny geckos. These guys are crevice masters and will escape almost every commercially available enclosure, something Fuji only wishes he could relate to. My solution was this jar vivarium. It was decked out with tons of coverage, ventilation holes, and even an 84-degree basking spot, but it was on the small side. That didn't bother me though. The plan was to always treat this as a temporary baby setup while they got settled in. But now it's gone. Let's build them a new home and make room for a big surprise. I prefer to scale up my enclosures as my reptiles grow, and these guys will be no different. Today's project will be purgatory for them. It's a bit of a place in between, like the DMV or a Papa John's that only does takeout. This bin is also not forever. It'll serve as their teenage enclosure before we put them into their final, more pretty adult setup. But that'll be its own video. After carving a nice, even ventilation hole, I'm using a razor to scrape away the sharp, crusty bits that form when you drill the extra ventilation holes. I'm taking a huge risk by not including a drainage layer. Is that a creative choice? No. I just don't have any, and I don't feel like spending any money. Because of that, we'll need to be very careful not to overwater to avoid root rot. For substrate, I'm using a Zilla jungle mix with some modifications. We need to avoid anaerobic pockets in the soil. These are areas without oxygen that will quickly kill our plants in this tropical environment. We need to rough it up a bit. To do that, I'm mixing in some chunkier ingredients so our roots can breathe. That'll include leaf litter, sphagnum moss, and reptibark. Plants are very cool. They aren't very funny, but they do provide the oxygen we need to sustain life on Earth. So that's something, I guess. We'll first create an orphan by separating mother and child. Bromeliads can actually be propagated by cutting off a pup, and I tried to King Arthur it off but had to resort to a kitchen knife to get the job done. They're epiphytes, so they grow on top of other plants and don't absorb nutrients through their roots like most other plants do. Because of that, we'll be poking them into a little clump of sphagnum moss. We'll also work in this beautiful philodendron. This will give our little geckos plenty of places to climb, hide, and improve their credit scores. This clay pot will make a perfect hide and will be the foundation of our warm basking side of the enclosure. I'm building it up further with this cork flat followed by another piece of the pot. Clay pots retain heat really well and will slowly release it long after the lights go out, just like rocks would, which is super handy for anyone that shares a bedroom with their reptiles and needs to sleep at a comfortable humid temperature. All these crevices offer tons of security and choices when it comes time to thermoregulate. As a finishing touch, I'm poking in some propagations of pothos and some creeping Charlie. We're adding springtails to make it truly bioactive. They're also getting a 7% UVB bulb that'll act as substitute for natural sunlight. The big moment is finally here, and it's time we introduce these two into their new home. And the surprise? Well, a third gecko. A menage a trois of adorable little lesbians. My friend told me I'm allowed to say that. She thinks girls are pretty. Mourning geckos are one of the small number of reptiles that can be kept communally and actually thrive together in groups, so uniting them as a trio will do them really well. They're also parthenogenetic, meaning they produce eggs asexually without mating. They basically just hang out and get pregnant, which sounds like a pretty handy excuse for some of you heathens. For this key moment, let's make sure the lens is just out of focus. Within 8 months, these little cuties are going to start popping out clones of themselves, so if you're interested, consider subscribing. And be sure to hit the bell notification so when I upload, it feels like we're texting. But if you hated this video, consider sending it to 10 of your friends to tell them how much you didn't like it, and make sure they watch the whole thing. At the time of filming, I have 43,920 subscribers. I showed my mom that number and she tried to pinch and zoom in on the phone. I truly have no words other than thank you. And I will see you soon. Oh, little car horn outside. You know? Whoop. Peace!